The night was cold, and the wind carried dust and rain through the empty streets. A man walked slowly, his shoes soaked from the puddles that covered the road. He was tired after a long day. 2 jobs, endless bills, and a small family waiting. At home for him, it felt like life never gave him a break. His jacket was old, the seams at the shoulders almost coming apart, but it was all he had to keep away the cold. He just wanted to reach home, sit down with his kids, maybe share the little food he had managed to buy on the way. As he crossed the corner of the street, he heard a faint sound like someone crying. He stopped, unsure if he had imagined it. The sound came again, a soft sob carried by the wind. He turned his head and saw a small figure under the flickering light of a bus stop. It was a girl, no older than 8 or 9. She had a small backpack clutched tightly to her chest, her face wet with tears and rain. He hesitated for a moment. It was late, and he was already tired. But the sight of that little girl, trembling alone in the dark, pulled at his heart. He walked slowly toward her, careful not to scare her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice low and calm. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear, then relief. I can't find my mom," she whispered. Her voice shook, like she had been crying for a long time. "Where did you last see her?" he asked softly. "At the big market. There were so many people. And then I was alone." Her words came out broken, like she was still trying to understand what had happened. The man looked around. The street was empty. There were no police, no shopkeepers, no one to help. He knew the market was far, at least an hour's walk from here. He sighed quietly. He didn't have money for a taxi, and buses didn't run this late. But leaving her alone wasn't an option. "Okay," he said finally, kneeling down so his eyes were level with hers. "We'll find your home. Don't worry." She nodded slowly, still holding the backpack as if it was the only thing keeping her safe. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her small shoulders. The rain had soaked through her thin clothes, and she shivered under its weight. He felt the cold bite at his own skin now, but he didn't mind. Children should not feel this kind of cold, he thought. They began walking. The streetlights were dim, some of them broken, leaving long stretches of darkness between pools of yellow light. The girl walked close to him, her small steps quick to keep up with his longer stride. After a while, he asked her gently, "Do you remember the way to your house?" She shook her head. "I just know it's near the school." With the blue gate, the man tried to picture the area in his mind. He had seen many houses with blue gates. It would take time. At a small shop still open by the roadside, he stopped. He only had a few coins left, meant for bread at home. But when he saw the girl's pale, tired face, he went inside and bought a warm piece of flatbread with his last money. "Here," he said, handing it to her. Her eyes lit up as she tore off small pieces and ate slowly, like she didn't want it to finish too soon. Watching her eat, he felt a strange ache in his chest. His own kids had probably eaten only half a meal tonight, because he had been late bringing food. Yet he didn't regret giving her the bread. As they walked, she started talking a little. About her mother who sold clothes in the market. About the doll she had left at home. About how scared she was when the crowd separated her from her mom. Her voice trembled sometimes, but she kept talking, as if speaking made her feel less alone. He listened quietly, nodding, giving small smiles. The night was long, but at least she was not crying anymore. He kept looking at every corner, every street sign, hoping to find the area she described. His shoes were heavy with water now, and his shirt clung to his skin, but he kept walking. Finally, after what felt like forever, the girl pointed at a turn ahead. "That way." "I think it's there," she said, a little hope in her voice. He nodded, tightening the jacket around her small frame. "Almost home," he said softly. For the first time that night, she smiled just a little. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle by the time they turned the corner. But the night was still cold and heavy. The little girl walked close to the man, holding his hand tightly, like she was afraid the world might swallow her up if she let go. He could feel how small and cold her fingers were, how her grip trembled every time a car passed by splashing water across the road. They moved through narrow lanes with broken streetlights, the kind of place where people rarely came out after dark. The man kept looking around, alert, ready to shield the girl if he had to. She was talking in a small, uneven voice, telling him about her favorite food, about the stray cat that sometimes came near her house, about her mother who worked so hard selling clothes at the market. She spoke like she was clinging to any memory that could keep her brave while walking through this night. The man listened, nodding softly, offering small words of comfort when she fell quiet. He didn't talk much about himself. He didn't tell her about the pile of unpaid bills on his table, or how his own kids had been wearing the same worn shoes for a year now. He didn't tell her how tired his body felt or how his back ached from lifting boxes all day. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about this little girl who needed someone to keep her safe. After some time, they came across a small tea stall still open on the side of the road. The man stopped, feeling his empty pockets. He had spent the last of his coins on the bread for the girl, but the warmth of the tea tempted him. She looked at the steaming cups on the counter and then at him, but she didn't ask for anything. The man smiled faintly and shook his head. "Maybe another day," he said softly. She nodded as if she understood that money was something precious, something you couldn't waste. They kept walking. Her little feet splashed through puddles, her shoes leaving small marks on the wet ground. He noticed how tired she was getting, her steps slower than before, her shoulders slumping under the jacket he had wrapped around her. She didn't complain, but he could see it on her face. "Do you want to rest for a minute?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I just want to go home," she whispered, her voice heavy with sleepiness. So they walked on. The man tried to cheer her up by pointing at the stray dogs running in the distance, or the flickering neon sign of a bakery still open late. For a moment, she smiled faintly when she saw a dog wagging its tail at them from across the road. As they reached a bigger road, they finally saw a few people waiting for a late-night bus. The man asked if anyone knew the area with the blue gate near the school. Most people shook their heads, uninterested. But one older man pointed down a side street. "Maybe that way," he said. The girl's face lit up at the words. "Yes. I think I've seen that road before," she said quickly, her voice filled with hope for the first time since they had met. So they turned onto the narrow street, the lights dim but enough for her to recognize the walls, the trees, the small shops that looked familiar. Her steps grew faster now, almost running ahead but still holding his hand tightly. "You know this place?" the man asked. She nodded eagerly. "I think my house is close. There's a blue gate. My mother painted it." The man felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. They had been walking for more than an hour through the cold and dark, but now at least there was hope that she would soon be home. He could see how her little face brightened as she looked around, her eyes scanning for the color she had been waiting to see. The road curved again, and she suddenly pointed ahead with a small gasp. "There, that's my house, the blue gate, I see it." She dropped his hand and ran a few steps forward, her backpack bouncing on her back, before stopping and looking back at him as if waiting for him to come along. The man followed slowly, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over him. Finally, the long walk was ending. The girl ran ahead, her small feet splashing through puddles, her eyes fixed on the familiar blue gate at the end of the street. The man followed slowly, his steps heavy from the long walk. He watched as she stopped in front of the gate, her tiny hands banging on it with all the energy she had left. "Mom, it's me," she shouted, her voice breaking through the quiet night. A moment later, the gate swung open. A woman rushed out, her face pale with worry, her hair messy like she had been searching for hours. She dropped to her knees and wrapped the little girl in her arms, holding her so tightly like she would never let go again. "My baby, where were you? I thought I lost you." The mother cried, her voice shaking with relief. The girl clung to her mother's neck, crying too but smiling through the tears. "I got lost, but he helped me," she said, pointing back at the man who stood a few steps away, his clothes still wet from the rain, his jacket missing because it was still wrapped around the girl's shoulders. The woman looked up at him, her eyes full of gratitude. She held her daughter close and walked over. "You brought her home?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded simply. "She was at the bus stop. I couldn't leave her alone." The woman's eyes softened as she looked at him closely. She noticed the exhaustion on his face, the way his clothes clung to him from the rain, the tiredness in his posture. Thank you so much," she said, her voice breaking again. "I don't know what I would have done if—" Her words caught in her throat, emotions too strong to finish the sentence. The man gave a small, tired smile. "It's okay, I'm just glad she's safe." The little girl tugged at the jacket around her shoulders. "He gave me his jacket, Mom, so I wouldn't be cold," she said softly. The mother looked at the jacket, then back at the man. He looked like someone who didn't have much himself, yet he had given everything he could to make sure her child was safe and warm. "Please, come inside," she said quickly. "At least have some tea, some food. You walked all this way." The man shook his head gently. "No, I need to get home too. My kids are waiting." The woman's eyes filled with tears again. "Then at least tell me your name, where you live. I want to thank you properly." But the man only smiled faintly and shook his head again. "No need," he said softly. "Just keep her safe. That's enough for me." Before they could say anything more, he turned and started walking back the way he came, his steps slow but steady. The mother stood at the gate, holding her daughter close, watching the man disappear into the night. Neighbors peeked out from their doors and windows, whispering about the stranger who had brought the lost girl home. Some asked the mother who he was, but she had no answer. All she knew was that a tired, kind man had appeared like a silent guardian and left just as quietly, asking for nothing in return. The girl watched him go until he was no longer visible, her little hand clutching the jacket he had left behind. "Mom," she whispered softly, "he didn't even tell us his name." The mother hugged her tighter, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Some people," she said quietly, "do good things without wanting anything back. Maybe we'll find him again someday." Inside the house, the lights glowed warm and soft, but outside, the man walked into the darkness, his back bent from the long day, his mind already on the children waiting for him at home. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon bring something to his own doorstep that would change everything. The next morning started like any other for the man. The sun had barely risen when he was already up, moving quietly, so he wouldn't wake the children. The roof leaked in 2 places, so he placed old pots underneath to catch the dripping water. He boiled some tea in a dented kettle and made sure the kids had a little bread to eat before school. His life was always about stretching what little he had, so that his children never felt the emptiness he carried inside. After the long night before, his body ached, but he didn't tell anyone. He kept moving, washing the cups, folding the thin blankets, checking the school bags to make sure the kids had at least a pencil and a notebook each. That was his life, quiet, simple, full of struggles no one saw. The memory of the lost girl crossed his mind more than once as he worked. He wondered if she had slept safely, if her mother had calmed down after all that fear. But he never expected to see them again. To him, it had just been the right thing to do, something anyone should have done. Then, around noon, while he was repairing an old chair for a neighbor, the sound of a car engine reached his ears. Not the rough sound of the usual vehicles in their area, but smooth, deep, and powerful. He looked up from his work just as a black luxury car turned slowly into their narrow lane. Its windows were tinted, its paint shining like polished glass, so out of place in this poor neighborhood that people began peeking out of doors and windows. The car stopped right in front of his small house. His children ran to the doorway, wide-eyed. Neighbors gathered nearby, whispering, wondering who in the world would bring such a car here. The man set down the broken chair slowly, wiping his hands on his faded trousers. He watched as the car door opened and the woman from last night stepped out. She looked different in the daylight, her clothes neat, her hair tied back, her face calmer, but her eyes still carrying the weight of what had happened. In her hands, she held a box wrapped in simple paper, and beside her stood the little girl, now smiling shyly, holding onto her mother's hand. The woman walked toward the man, her steps firm, but her expression soft. "This is where you live?" she asked. Gently. The man nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "Yes. This is my home," he said quietly. She looked at the small house, at the children standing barefoot in the doorway, and then at the man whose clothes were worn, but whose eyes held a quiet strength. "I came to thank you," she said softly. "You brought my daughter home last night. You walked all that way in the cold, in the rain, and you asked for nothing." The man shook his head. "It was nothing. I couldn't leave her alone." The little girl ran up to him then, holding out the jacket he had given her the night before. "You forgot this," she said in her small voice. He smiled faintly as he took it back, the fabric still damp in places. "Keep it," he said gently. "You might need it again." The woman's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "No," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't come just to return a jacket." She turned and signaled to someone. Inside the car, another person stepped out, carrying a large envelope. The neighbors murmured louder now, the air thick with curiosity. The woman looked at the man squarely, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You don't know this, but I own a company in the city," she said. "Last night, when you helped my daughter, you didn't know who we were. You didn't ask for money, or thanks, or even our names. You just helped. People like you. They are rare." The man shifted uneasily, unsure why she was saying all this in front of everyone. "I only did what was right," he said quietly. The woman stepped closer, handing him the box she carried. "This is a small gift," she said softly, "and inside this envelope, there's something more." The man looked down at it, confused. As she continued speaking, "I want to offer you a job. Something better than what you're doing now. A chance for your children to have the life they deserve." The neighbors gasped. The man stood frozen, his rough hands holding the box like he didn't know whether to open it or give it back. He had no idea what to say. The man stood there frozen, his rough hands gripping the box and the envelope like they might disappear if he moved too quickly. His children were at the doorway, staring wide-eyed, not sure if this was real or some dream that would fade when they blinked. The neighbors stood in silence, whispering among themselves, trying to guess what was inside the envelope. He slowly opened the box first. Inside was a set of new clothes for his children, shoes that actually looked warm enough for the coming winter, and some bags of food, rice, flour, sugar, things his family rarely had enough of. His kids' eyes lit up the moment they saw the food, and one of them smiled so wide it made his chest ache in a way he couldn't explain. Then, with trembling fingers, he opened the envelope. It held more money than he had ever seen in his life. Enough to pay the rent for months, enough to fix the roof that leaked every time it rained, enough to make sure his children would eat every single day without him having to skip meals himself. There was also a letter inside, neatly typed, offering him a job at the woman's company. A stable job with good pay, nothing fancy, but more than enough to lift his family out of the endless struggle they had lived in for years. For a long moment, he just stood there staring, the paper shaking slightly in his hands. He didn't know whether to smile, cry, or fall to his knees in disbelief. His throat felt tight, and his eyes burned as he looked at the woman who had given him all this. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "Why are you doing this?" The woman stepped closer, her daughter holding onto her hand. "Because people like you still make the world good," she said softly. "You had nothing, and still gave everything. You didn't know us. You didn't care who we were. You only cared about helping a child who was lost. That kind of kindness, it deserves to be repaid." The little girl let go of her mother's hand and walked over to him, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Thank you," she said in her small, soft voice, the same voice that had been filled with fear the night before. "You're my hero." Something inside him broke at those words. He bent down, hugging the girl gently, his own children gathering around him too. The neighbors watched silently, some wiping their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief, at how a simple act of kindness had turned into something so life-changing. The man straightened slowly, his face wet but not from the rain this time. "I don't know what to say," he admitted quietly. "Just say yes," the woman said kindly. "Let this be the start of something better for you and for them." She looked at his children, their faces glowing with hope for the first time in a long while. He nodded slowly, unable to speak as tears blurred his vision. For years, life had given him nothing but hardship, but here he was, holding the chance to change everything in his hands, all because he had chosen to help a lost little girl. Instead of walking away, as the car drove off a few minutes later, the neighbors still stood around, talking in hushed voices. But the man didn't hear them. He sat on the small step outside his house, his children leaning against him, the envelope still in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt something deep inside his chest. He had almost forgotten hope. He looked at the sky, at the fading clouds after the night's rain, and let out a long breath. Life had been hard, but maybe things were about to change.